The morning sun barely touched the kitchen window when Rachel heard her father's heavy footsteps on the stairs. Today was supposed to be special, her 18th birthday. The day she'd been dreaming about for months. College acceptance letters were scattered across her desk upstairs, each one a doorway to the future she'd worked so hard to build. But something felt wrong. The house was too quiet. Her mother wasn't humming in the kitchen like she usually did on special mornings. Instead, she sat at the table with red, swollen eyes, clutching a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," her mother whispered. But the words came out broken. Rachel's father entered the kitchen, and she immediately noticed he couldn't look her in the eye. His hands shook as he poured himself coffee, spilling drops on the counter. These weren't the hands of the confident man who used to throw her high in the air when she was little. These were the hands of someone who'd made a terrible mistake. "Dad, what's going on?" Rachel asked, setting down her backpack. She'd planned to walk to school early today to meet with her guidance counselor about scholarship paperwork. Her father finally looked at her, and what she saw made her stomach drop. Guilt, fear, and something else she'd never seen in his eyes before. Defeat. "Rachel, we need to talk." Those 4 words changed everything. She'd heard them before, usually when her grades slipped or when she stayed out past curfew. But this felt different, heavier, like the kind of conversation that splits life into. Before and after that, her mother let out a sob and left the room, unable to watch what was about to happen. The coffee cup remained on the table, steam no longer rising from its surface. "Sit down, honey." Rachel remained standing. Something deep inside told her that once she sat down, once she heard what her father had to say, her life would never be the same. "Just tell me, Dad." Her father ran his hands through his graying hair, a habit she'd noticed becoming more frequent over the past few months. Now she understood why. The late-night phone calls, the mysterious meetings, the way he jumped every time someone knocked on the door. "I've made some mistakes, Rachel, big ones." The words came slowly, like he was pulling each one from somewhere deep and painful. He told her about the gambling, how it started small, just a few games with friends from work, how it grew into something he couldn't control. Weekend trips to the casino that turned into week-long disappearances. Online poker games that ate through their savings while she slept upstairs, dreaming of college. How much? Rachel asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. $47,000. The number hit her like a physical blow. Rachel thought about her college fund, the money her grandparents had left her, the savings from her part-time job at the local diner. All of it combined wouldn't even come close to that amount. "We can figure this out," she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "I can take a gap year, work full-time. Mom can pick up extra shifts at the hospital. We'll make payments." Her father's face crumpled. "It's not that simple, honey. These aren't the kind of people who accept payment plans." As if summoned by his words, 3 black cars pulled into their driveway. Rachel watched through the kitchen window as men in expensive stepped out, their movements calm and deliberate. They weren't here to negotiate. The doorbell rang, but before anyone could answer, the front door opened. These men had keys to her house. The realization sent ice through her veins. "Mr. Peterson," a voice called from the living room. "We're here for our arrangement." Rachel looked at her father in confusion. What arrangement? The man who appeared in the kitchen doorway was shorter than she'd expected, with silver hair and kind eyes that didn't match the situation. He looked like someone's grandfather, not the type of person she'd imagined would be involved in something like this. "Miss Peterson," he said with a slight nod, "happy birthday." "Thank you," she replied automatically, her mind racing to understand what was happening. "Your father has told you about his debt?" Rachel nodded, not trusting her voice. "Good, then. You understand why we're here." He pulled out a leather folder and set it on the kitchen table where her mother's abandoned coffee cup still sat. "Your father has arranged a solution that works for everyone." "I don't understand." The man opened the folder, revealing official-looking documents with her name typed across the top. "Your father has arranged for you to marry Daniel Kane. He owns a ranch about 3 hours north of here. Good man, honest. He'll take care of you. The words didn't make sense at first. They bounced around in her head like puzzle pieces that didn't fit together. Marriage? Ranch? She looked at her father, waiting for him to explain that this was some kind of misunderstanding. Dad? I had no choice, Rachel. They were going to. They said they'd hurt you and your mother if I didn't find a way to pay. So you sold me? The words came out as a whisper, but they filled the entire room. It's not like that, her father said quickly. Daniel needed a wife. He's been alone for years since his family ... since the accident. He offered to pay off my debt in exchange for a marriage arrangement. It's not uncommon in rural areas. People help each other out. Rachel stared at the documents, her name appearing again and again next to words like covenant and obligation and transfer. She thought about her college acceptance letters upstairs, about the scholarship interview she was supposed to have next week, about the life she'd planned that was disappearing with each passing second. I won't do it. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the kitchen clock, the same clock that had marked time for every important moment of her childhood. Birthday mornings, Christmas preparations, late-night study sessions for exams that now seemed pointless. Rachel, the man said gently, your father has already signed the papers. The arrangement is legal and binding. Mr. Kane is expecting you. Today, I'm 18. You can't make me marry someone I've never met. Actually, the man continued, his voice still eerily kind, according to these documents you can. Your father signed as your guardian until the marriage is complete? After that, Mr. Kane becomes responsible for you. Responsible for her. She was property to be transferred from one owner to another. She looked around the kitchen where she'd eaten thousands of meals, where her mother had bandaged her scraped knees and helped her with homework. The refrigerator was covered with her achievement certificates and honor roll awards. Pictures of her high school graduation smiled back at her from the counter. Evidence of a life that was about to end. How long do I have? The car is waiting. Outside, Mr. Kane is expecting you before dinner. Rachel felt her legs give way, and she finally took the seat her father had offered earlier. This was really happening. In a matter of hours, she would be in a car with strangers, heading toward a life she'd never chosen with a man she'd never met. Her 18th birthday, the day she was supposed to become free, had instead become the day she lost everything. The 3-hour drive felt like a journey to another planet. Rachel pressed her face against the car window, watching familiar neighborhoods give way to empty highways, then rolling hills, and finally vast stretches of land where she could drive for miles without seeing another house. The men in the car barely spoke except to answer phone calls in hushed voices. She clutched her single suitcase on her lap, everything she owned in the world reduced to one small bag. Her phone had died somewhere outside the city limits, cutting her last connection to her old life. She'd tried to text her best friend, her cousin, anyone who might help, but the messages never went through. Now the black screen stared back at her like a mirror, reflecting a face she barely recognized. When had she become so pale? When had her eyes become so wide with fear? The landscape grew more remote with each passing mile. Fences stretched endlessly alongside the road, marking property lines for ranches so large she couldn't see where they ended. Occasionally she spotted cattle in the distance, small dark shapes against the golden grass. This was a different world. From the suburbs where she'd grown up, where houses sat close together, and you could walk to the corner store for milk. Almost there, the driver said, breaking the silence that had lasted for over an hour. Rachel's stomach twisted. She'd spent the entire drive hoping for a miracle, imagining that her father would call and say it was all a mistake, that he'd found another way to handle his debt. But her dead phone meant no calls were coming. No rescue was on the way. They turned onto a gravel road that seemed to lead into nowhere. Dust clouds followed the car, and Rachel could hear rocks pinging against the underside of the vehicle. The road went on for what felt like forever, winding through pastures and past a small creek that reflected the late afternoon sun. Finally, she saw it. The ranch house sat alone against the backdrop of rolling hills, looking smaller and more isolated than she'd imagined. It was a simple, two-story building with white siding that had seen better days. A wraparound porch stretched across the front, and she could see rocking chairs that looked like they hadn't been used in years. Behind the house, several barns and outbuildings dotted the property, and in the distance she spotted more cattle, but what struck her most was the silence. As the car engine shut off, an overwhelming quiet settled around them. No traffic sounds, no neighbors' dogs barking, no city noise at all. Just the whisper of wind through the grass and the distant lowing of cattle. The front door of the house opened, and a man stepped onto the porch. Daniel Kane looked nothing like what she'd expected. She'd imagined someone old and cruel, maybe someone who looked as dangerous as the men her father owed money to. Instead, the man walking toward their car appeared to be in his mid-30s, tall and lean with dark hair that needed a cut. He wore faded jeans and a work shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing arms tanned from outdoor labor. But it was his eyes that surprised her most. They weren't cold or calculating. They looked tired, sad even, like someone who'd seen too much of the world's pain and had retreated here to escape it. "Miss Peterson," he said as she stepped out of the car, his voice quiet and respectful. "I'm Daniel." Rachel nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Up close, she could see lines around his eyes that made him look older than his years. His hands, she noticed, were calloused from hard work but gentle as he gestured toward the house. The men from the car handed Daniel an envelope, exchanged a few quiet words, and drove away without ceremony. Rachel watched their taillights disappear down the gravel road, taking with them her last connection to the world she knew. "I know this isn't what you wanted," Daniel said, still standing several feet away from her. "I want you to know that I didn't ask for this situation either." His honesty surprised her. She'd expected demands, rules, immediate expectations about her role as his wife. Instead, he picked up her suitcase and walked toward the house, moving slowly enough that she could keep up. The inside of the house felt frozen in time. The furniture was functional but sparse, as if someone had bought only what was absolutely necessary and nothing more. Family photos lined the mantelpiece above a stone fireplace, but Rachel noticed they all seemed to be from years ago. More recent pictures showed only Daniel, often standing alone beside tractors or horses. "Your room is upstairs," he said, leading her up a wooden staircase that creaked under their weight. "Second door on the right." Rachel's room turned out to be surprisingly bright, with windows facing both east and south that filled the space with afternoon light. The furniture was simple but clean: a double bed with a plain blue quilt, a wooden dresser, and a small desk under one of the windows. Someone had put fresh flowers in a jar on the knitstand, though she couldn't imagine this quiet, serious man picking wildflowers. "The bathroom is across the hall," Daniel continued, setting her suitcase on the bed. "You'll share it with me, but I'm usually up and done with everything before 6 in the morning, so you shouldn't have to worry about that." Rachel finally found her voice. "What do you expect from me?" The question hung in the air between them. This was the moment she'd been dreading during the entire car ride, when she'd learn what her new life would really look like. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that reminded her of her father's nervous habits. "I expect you to be safe here, that's all. But the marriage, the papers are signed," he said simply. "That was the arrangement your father made. But what happens between us is up to us to figure out." He moved toward the door, then paused. "I know you didn't choose this, Rachel. I won't pretend this is some fairy tale where everything works out perfectly, but I also won't let anyone hurt you. You have my word on that." After he left, closing the door quietly behind him, Rachel sat on the edge of the bed and looked out the window. The view stretched for miles without a single house in sight. She'd never felt so alone in her life, yet somehow Daniel's words had planted a tiny seed of something she hadn't expected to feel: relief. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her clothes in the empty closet and placing her books on the desk. As she arranged her things, she tried to imagine what her life would look like now. Would she spend her days cleaning this big, empty house? Would Daniel expect her to cook and take care of him like wives did in old movies? As if reading her thoughts, she heard sounds from the kitchen below. The clatter of pans, the opening and closing of cabinets. She crept to the top of the stairs and listened. Daniel was cooking dinner. The smell of something savory drifted upstairs, making her realize she hadn't eaten since breakfast. Her stomach growled, but she couldn't bring herself to go downstairs. What would they talk about? What did you say to a stranger you were now legally married to? A soft knock on her door solved the problem for her. Rachel? Dinner's ready if you're hungry. If not, I can leave a plate for you. She opened the door to find Daniel holding a dinner tray. Pot roast with vegetables, a piece of fresh bread, and a glass of milk. He'd made her a plate without being asked, like her mother used to do when she was sick. Thank you, she said, taking the tray. Their fingers brushed briefly, and she was surprised by how warm his hands were. Tomorrow I'll show you around the property, if you want. Help you get your bearings. After he left, Rachel ate slowly, looking out at the darkening landscape. Stars were beginning to appear, more stars than she'd ever seen in the city. The silence that had seemed so frightening earlier now felt almost peaceful. Maybe, she thought, this wouldn't be the end of her story. After all. Rachel woke to the sound of a truck engine starting outside her window. The digital clock on the knitstand read 5:30 a.m., and through the thin curtains she could see the sky was still dark. She'd barely slept, spending most of the night staring at the ceiling and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the countryside, owls hooting in the distance, the wind whistling through the eaves, the settling creaks of an old house. She pulled on jeans and a sweater and crept downstairs, drawn by the smell of coffee and something else she couldn't identify. The kitchen was empty, but a fresh pot of coffee sat warming on the counter. Through the window above the sink, she could see Daniel loading hay bales onto the back of his pickup truck. His breath visible in the cold morning air. Rachel poured herself a cup of coffee and stood at the window, watching him work. His movements were efficient and practiced, like someone who'd been doing this routine for years. She noticed he favored his left leg slightly, a barely visible limp that suggested an old injury. Everything about him seemed to tell a story she didn't know yet. The first few days passed in an awkward dance of politeness. Daniel left early each morning before she was fully awake and returned at sunset, dusty and tired. They shared quiet dinners where they talked about safe topics like the weather and the cattle. He never asked her personal questions, and she didn't volunteer information about her old life. It felt like living with a respectful stranger. Rachel spent her days exploring the house, discovering rooms that looked like they hadn't been used in years. A formal dining room with a table set for 6, though dust covered the dishes. A study filled with veterinary textbooks and farming journals. A living room with family photos that showed Daniel with a woman and a little girl, all 3 of them, laughing at some shared joke as she was dusting these photos on her 4th day at the ranch when she noticed something troubling. The most recent pictures were from several years ago. In the older photos, Daniel looked younger, happier. His smile reached his eyes. In the newer ones, even when he was smiling, something was missing. That afternoon, while Daniel was out checking fence lines, Rachel decided to venture outside. The ranch was bigger than she'd realized from her bedroom window. Behind the main house, a large red barn housed farming equipment and several horses. A smaller building turned out to be a chicken coop, though it was empty now. Everything was well-maintained, but had an abandoned feeling, like a movie set after the actors had gone home. She was walking back toward the house when she stumbled. Her ankle twisted painfully and she went down hard on the gravel driveway. When she tried to stand, a sharp pain shot up her leg and she had to sit back down immediately. Need some help? Rachel looked up to find Daniel standing over her, concern written across his face. She hadn't heard his truck return. I think I twisted my ankle, she said, embarrassed. I was just looking around. Without hesitation, Daniel knelt beside her and gently examined her ankle through her sneaker. His touch was surprisingly gentle for hands so calloused from ranch work. It's swelling already, he said. We should get some ice on this. Before she could protest, he scooped her up in his arms and carried her toward the house. Rachel was surprised by how easily he lifted her and how safe she felt despite barely knowing him. I can walk, she said weakly. Not on that ankle, you can't. He set her down on the kitchen chair and immediately went to get ice from the freezer. As he wrapped the ice pack in a dish towel and placed it gently on her ankle, Rachel watched his face. He looked worried, more worried than seemed necessary for a simple twisted ankle. "Thank you," she said. Daniel nodded and started making tea without being asked. "You should stay off it for the rest of the day. Keep it elevated." "I was just exploring. I didn't mean to cause trouble." "You're not causing trouble." He handed her the steaming mug. "This is your home now. You should know your way around." The word home hung in the air between them. Rachel had been thinking of this place as a prison, but the way Daniel said it made it sound like something different. A place where she belonged. That evening, Daniel surprised her by bringing dinner to the living room so she could keep her foot up on the coffee table. Instead of eating in their usual silence, he started talking about the ranch, how it had been in his family for 3 generations, how his grandfather had built the main barn with his own hands, how his father had expanded the property to include the western pastures. "What about the veterinary books in the study?" Rachel asked. Daniel's face changed, becoming more guarded. "I used to be a vet before I took over the ranch full-time." "Used to be?" He was quiet for so long that Rachel thought he wasn't going to answer. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I had a practice in town. My wife Lisa was a teacher at the elementary school. Our daughter Amy was 7. He paused, staring into his coffee cup. 3 years ago, they were driving home from Amy's soccer practice when a drunk driver ran a red light." Rachel felt her breath catch. The family photos suddenly made sense. The empty feeling of the house. The way Daniel seemed to move through life like he was sleepwalking. "I'm so sorry," she said, and meant it. "After that I couldn't handle being around sick animals anymore. Every time I had to put an animal down, every time I couldn't save something, I saw their faces." He looked up at her and she saw pain in his eyes that was still fresh despite the years that had passed. "So I came back here. It was easier to be alone." Rachel understood now why he'd agreed to her father's arrangement. It wasn't about wanting a wife. It was about saving the ranch that held his family's memories while helping someone else solve their problems. 2 broken people trying to survive their circumstances. "Is that why you helped me?" she asked. "Because you know what it's like to have your life turned upside down?" "Maybe," he admitted. "Or maybe because everyone deserves a chance to start over." The next morning, Rachel woke up with a fever. Her ankle was better, but her head was pounding, and her throat felt like sandpaper. She tried to get up to make coffee, but dizziness forced her back to bed. She must have dozed off, because the next thing she knew, Daniel was sitting in the chair beside her bed, a cool washcloth in his hand. "Your fever's pretty high," he said, placing the cloth on her forehead. "When's the last time you were sick?" "I don't get sick," Rachel mumbled, though clearly that wasn't true anymore. Daniel smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. "Everyone gets sick sometimes. It's nothing to be ashamed of." He stayed with her all day, bringing her soup and making sure she drank enough water. When her fever spiked in the afternoon, he called a doctor friend who made a house call and confirmed it was just a virus that needed to run its course. That night, when Rachel woke up shivering despite her fever, she found Daniel asleep in the chair beside her bed, a book open on his lap. He'd been watching over her, making sure she was okay. For the first time since arriving at the ranch, Rachel felt something other than fear or resentment. She felt cared for. Not like property or an obligation, but like someone who mattered. When Daniel woke up and saw her watching him, he looked embarrassed. "Sorry, I didn't mean to fall asleep here. I was just making sure your fever didn't get worse." "Thank you," Rachel said. And this time the words carried more weight than just politeness. As Daniel gathered his book and prepared to leave, Rachel realized something had shifted between them. They weren't strangers anymore. They were 2 people who'd both lost the lives they'd planned, trying to figure out how to build something new from the pieces that remained. Rachel woke to the sound of a truck engine starting outside her window. The digital clock on the knitstand read 5:30 a.m., and through the thin curtains she could see the sky was still dark. She'd barely slept, spending most of the night staring at the ceiling and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the countryside, owls hooting in the distance, the wind whistling through the eaves, the settling creaks of an old house. She pulled on jeans and a sweater and crept downstairs, drawn by the smell of coffee and something else she couldn't identify. The kitchen was empty, but a fresh pot of coffee sat warming on the counter. Through the window above the sink, she could see Daniel loading hay bales onto the back of his pickup truck, his breath visible in the cold morning air. Rachel poured herself a cup of coffee and stood at the window, watching him work. His movements were efficient and practiced, like someone who'd been doing this routine for years. She noticed he favored his left leg slightly, a barely visible limp that suggested an old injury. Everything about him seemed to tell a story she didn't know yet. The first few days passed in an awkward dance of politeness. Daniel left early each morning before she was fully awake and returned at sunset, dusty and tired. They shared quiet dinners where they talked about safe topics like the weather and the cattle. He never asked her personal questions, and she didn't volunteer information about her old life. It felt like living with a respectful stranger. Rachel spent her days exploring the house, discovering rooms that looked like they hadn't been used in years. A formal dining room with a table set for 6, though dust covered the dishes. A study filled with veterinary textbooks and farming journals. A living room with family photos that showed Daniel with a woman and a little girl, all 3 of them, laughing at some shared joke. She was dusting these photos on her 4th day at the ranch when she noticed something troubling. The most recent pictures were from several years ago. In the older photos, Daniel looked younger, happier. His smile reached his eyes. In the newer ones, even when he was smiling, something was missing. That afternoon, while Daniel was out checking fence lines, Rachel decided to venture outside. The ranch was bigger than she'd realized from her bedroom window. Behind the main house, a large red barn housed farming equipment and several horses. A smaller building turned out to be a chicken coop, though it was empty now. Everything was well-maintained but had an abandoned feeling, like a movie set after the actors had gone home. She was walking back toward the house when she stumbled. Her ankle twisted painfully, and she went down hard on the gravel driveway. When she tried to stand, a sharp pain shot up her leg, and she had to sit back down immediately. "Need some help?" Rachel looked up to find Daniel standing over her, concern written across his face. She hadn't heard his truck return. "I think I twisted my ankle," she said, embarrassed. "I was just looking around." Without hesitation, Daniel knelt beside her and gently examined her ankle through her sneaker. His touch was surprisingly gentle for hands so calloused from ranch work. "It's swelling already," he said. "We should get some ice on this." Before she could protest, he scooped her up in his arms and carried her toward the house. Rachel was surprised by how easily he lifted her and how safe she felt despite barely knowing him. "I can walk," she said weakly. "Not on that ankle, you can't." He set her down on the kitchen chair and immediately went to get ice from the freezer. As he wrapped the ice pack in a dish towel and placed it gently on her ankle, Rachel watched his face. He looked worried, more worried than seemed necessary for a simple, twisted ankle. "Thank you," she said. Daniel nodded and started making tea without being asked. "You should stay off it for the rest of the day. Keep it elevated." "I was just exploring. I didn't mean to cause trouble." "You're not causing trouble." He handed her the steaming mug. "This is your home now. You should know your way around." The word home hung in the air between them. Rachel had been thinking of this place as a prison, but the way Daniel said it made it sound like something different. A place where she belonged. That evening, Daniel surprised her by bringing dinner to the living room so she could keep her foot up on the coffee table. Instead of eating in their usual silence, he started talking about the ranch, how it had been in his family for 3 generations, how his grandfather had built the main barn with his own hands, how his father had expanded the property to include the western pastures. "What about the veterinary books in the study?" Rachel asked. Daniel's face changed, becoming more guarded. "I used to be a vet before I took over the ranch full-time." "Used to be?" He was quiet for so long that Rachel thought he wasn't going to answer. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I had a practice in town. My wife Lisa was a teacher at the elementary school. Our daughter Amy was 7. He paused, staring into his coffee cup. 3 years ago, they were driving home from Amy's soccer practice when a drunk driver ran a red light. Rachel felt her breath catch. The family photos suddenly made sense. The empty feeling of the house. The way Daniel seemed to move through life like he was sleepwalking. "I'm so sorry," she said, and meant it. After that, I couldn't handle being around sick animals anymore. Every time I had to put an animal down, every time I couldn't save something, I saw their faces. He looked up at her and she saw pain in his eyes that was still fresh despite the years that had passed. So I came back here. It was easier to be alone. Rachel understood now why he'd agreed to her father's arrangement. It wasn't about wanting a wife. It was about saving the ranch that held his family's memories while helping someone else solve their problems. 2 broken people trying to survive their circumstances. "Is that why you helped me?" she asked. "Because you know what it's like to have your life turned upside down?" "Maybe," he admitted. "Or maybe because everyone deserves a chance to start over." The next morning, Rachel woke up with a fever. Her ankle was better, but her head was pounding, and her throat felt like sandpaper. She tried to get up to make coffee, but dizziness forced her back to bed. She must have dozed off. Because the next thing she knew, Daniel was sitting in the chair beside her bed, a cool washcloth in his hand. "Your fever's pretty high," he said, placing the cloth on her forehead. "When's the last time you were sick?" "I don't get sick," Rachel mumbled, though clearly that wasn't true anymore. Daniel smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. "Everyone gets sick sometimes. It's nothing to be ashamed of." He stayed with her all day, bringing her soup and making sure she drank enough water. When her fever spiked in the afternoon, he called a doctor friend who made a house call and confirmed it was just a virus that needed to run its course. That night, when Rachel woke up shivering despite her fever, she found Daniel asleep in the chair beside her bed, a book open on his lap. He'd been watching over her, making sure she was okay. For the first time since arriving at the ranch, Rachel felt something other than fear or resentment. She felt cared for. Not like property or an obligation, but like someone who mattered. When Daniel woke up and saw her watching him, he looked embarrassed. "Sorry, I didn't mean to fall asleep here. I was just making sure your fever didn't get worse." "Thank you," Rachel said. And this time the words carried more weight than just politeness. As Daniel gathered his book and prepared to leave, Rachel realized something had shifted between them. They weren't strangers anymore. They were 2 people who'd both lost the lives they'd planned, trying to figure out how to build something new from the pieces that remained. Spring arrived at the ranch like a gentle awakening. Rachel had been there for 3 months now, and she was surprised to find herself looking forward to each new day instead of counting the hours until she could escape. The storm had changed. Something between her and Daniel, breaking down walls they'd both built around their hearts. She woke early one morning to the sound of Daniel loading equipment into his truck. Through her window, she could see him moving with more urgency than usual. When she made it downstairs, she found a note on the kitchen counter written in Daniel's careful handwriting. "Emergency at the North Pasture. Back by noon. Coffee's fresh, Rachel." Poured herself a cup and wandered outside, drawn by sounds she'd never heard before. Following the noise, she discovered Daniel hadn't gone far at all. He was in the large barn, kneeling beside a cow that was clearly in distress. "What's happening?" Rachel asked, staying near the barn door. "She's calving, but something's wrong," Daniel said without looking up. His voice was tense with concentration. "The calf is positioned wrong. I need to help turn it." Rachel watched as Daniel worked with the struggling animal, his movements gentle but firm. She'd seen him care for her when she was sick, but this was different. This was the veterinarian. He used to be the man who dedicated his life to healing. "Can I help?" she asked. "Just stay back for now. If things go bad, but things didn't go bad." After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, Daniel successfully helped deliver a healthy calf. The mother cow immediately began cleaning her baby, and the relief on Daniel's face was unmistakable. "You did it," Rachel said, stepping closer. "We both did," Daniel replied, gesturing to the cow. She did all the hard work. Over the next few weeks, Rachel found herself drawn into the daily rhythm of ranch life. She started helping Daniel with feeding the animals, learning to recognize which cows were expecting and when. She discovered she had a natural touch with the horses, who seemed to calm down when she spoke to them in the same gentle voice she'd once used with nervous children at her part-time job back home. "You're a natural at this," Daniel told her one afternoon as she successfully led a skittish Murray out to pasture. "I never thought I'd like animals this much," Rachel admitted. "In the city, we had a cat when I was little, but that was it." "Animals are honest," Daniel said, watching the Mare trot happily to join the other horses. "They don't pretend to feel things they don't feel. They don't lie or manipulate. If they trust you, it's because you've earned it." Rachel understood he was talking about more than just animals. The real test came during calving season, when several cows were due to give birth within the same week. Daniel barely slept, checking on the pregnant cows every few hours throughout the night. Rachel started staying up with him, bringing him coffee and learning to spot the signs that indicated a cow was ready to deliver. "There," Daniel said one night, pointing to a cow standing apart from the herd. "See how she's restless? How she keeps looking back at her sides? She probably start active labor within the hour." Rachel watched the cow pace back and forth, occasionally lying down and then standing up again. "How do you know when to step in and help?" "Experience and instinct. Most of the time, nature handles things just fine, but sometimes ... Daniel trailed off as the cow let out a low, distressed sound. "Sometimes you have to trust yourself to know when to act." This particular birth was complicated. The calf was much larger than expected, and the mother cow was struggling. Daniel worked for over an hour, and Rachel could see the frustration building on his face. "It's not working," he said finally, sitting back on his heels. "I might lose them both." "No," Rachel said firmly, "you won't. You're the best veterinarian these animals could have." "I'm not a veterinarian anymore." "Yes, you are. You're exactly what you've always been. The storm didn't change that. Losing Lisa and Amy didn't change that. You're still the man who saves lives." Daniel looked at her for a long moment, then turned back to the struggling cow with renewed determination. This time, his movements were more confident, more decisive. Within minutes, he'd successfully delivered a healthy calf. As they watched the mother cow clean her baby, Daniel reached for Rachel's hand. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For reminding me who I am." Word of Daniel's skill with difficult births spread quickly among the neighboring ranchers. Soon, people were calling him for help with their own animals. At first he hesitated, but Rachel encouraged him to say yes. "Mrs. Patterson's been raising cattle for 30 years. Rachel told him after taking a message from a neighboring ranch. "If she's asking for help, it's because she really needs it." Daniel drove to the Patterson ranch that afternoon and successfully delivered twin calves that the local vet had said might not survive. When he came home that evening, he looked lighter somehow, like he'd remembered something important about himself. "How did it feel?" Rachel asked. "Like coming back to life," Daniel admitted. Rachel started helping him with these calls, learning to assist during difficult births and care for newborn animals. She discovered she had a gift for calming anxious mothers, both animal and human. Mrs. Patterson's daughter, who'd been worried sick about her prize cow, burst into tears of relief when both calves survived. "You two make a good team," Mrs. Patterson told them as they packed up their equipment. On the drive home, Daniel was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "I've been thinking about reopening my practice. Not full-time, just helping with large animals, ranch calls." "I think that's wonderful," Rachel said. "Would you want to help? I could teach you more about animal care. You're already better with them than some people who've been doing this for years." Rachel felt a surge of excitement unlike anything she'd experienced since arriving at the ranch. "You'd want me as your assistant?" "I'd want you as my partner." The word partner hung between them, heavy with meaning that went beyond just work. That night, Rachel called the local community college from Daniel's landline. She'd been thinking about it for weeks, but hadn't had the courage to make the call. Until now. I'd like to know about your veterinary assistant program. She told the woman who answered that Daniel was reading in his chair when she hung up the phone. He looked up at her expectantly. They have a program that starts in the fall, Rachel said. I could get certified as a veterinary assistant. It would take 2 years, but I could do most of the coursework online and drive to town for the practical classes. Is that what you want? Rachel thought about her old dreams of college, of the acceptance letters gathering dust in her bedroom back home. Those dreams had been about escaping her small town, about becoming someone important in a big city. But standing here in Daniel's living room, surrounded by veterinary books and the quiet satisfaction of a day spent helping animals, she realized her dreams had changed. Yes, she said, this is what I want. Daniel smiled, the kind of smile that started in his eyes and spread across his entire face. Then we'll make it happen. As Rachel went upstairs to bed that night, she thought about how different her life looked now compared to 3 months ago. She wasn't the frightened girl who'd been forced into a car on her 18th birthday. She was someone who'd found her, calling in the most unexpected place. Someone who'd discovered that sometimes the best adventures were the ones you never planned for. She was finally home. Summer came to the ranch like a warm embrace, bringing with it longer days and a sense of possibility that Rachel had never felt before. She'd been there for 6 months now, and the woman who looked back at her from the bathroom mirror each morning was almost unrecognizable from the frightened girl who'd arrived in a stranger's car. Her hands were stronger now, tan from outdoor work and confident in ways they'd never been before. She could deliver a calf, calm a nervous horse, and diagnose common cattle ailments almost as well as Daniel. More importantly, she'd found something she'd never had in her old life. A sense of belonging. The veterinary assistant program would start in September, and Rachel spent her evenings studying the textbooks Daniel had ordered for her. She was particularly fascinated by large animal medicine, a field that was becoming less common as more veterinarians focused on small animals and pets. You're going to be one of the few people in the state who really understands cattle medicine, Daniel told her one evening as they reviewed a chapter on bovine nutrition. That's going to make you very valuable. Is that why you're teaching me? Rachel asked, looking up from her notes. Because I'll be valuable? Daniel's pen stopped moving across the page. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. You know that's not why. The air between them felt charged, like the moments before a thunderstorm. Rachel was aware of how close they were sitting on the couch, how his shoulder brushed against hers, when he leaned over to point out something in the textbook. These moments had been happening more frequently lately, small touches and long looks that neither of them acknowledged but both felt. Then why? Rachel asked softly, before Daniel could answer. His phone rang. Mrs. Chun from the neighboring ranch was calling about a mare having trouble with labor. Daniel and Rachel grabbed their equipment and drove through the warm summer night to help. The birth was complicated. The foal was positioned wrong, and the mare was exhausted from hours of unsuccessful labor. Daniel worked carefully to reposition the foal while Rachel monitored the mare's vital signs and kept her as calm as possible. Easy, girl, Rachel murmured to the horse, stroking her neck. We're going to help you. Everything's going to be okay. The mare seemed to respond to Rachel's voice, her breathing becoming less labored. Daniel noticed it too. Keep talking to her, he said, his arms deep in the birth canal as he worked to turn the foal. She trusts you. For over an hour they worked together in perfect synchronization. Rachel anticipated Daniel's needs, handing him instruments before he asked and monitoring the mare's condition constantly. When the foal finally emerged, healthy and breathing, Rachel felt a rush of joy that was almost overwhelming, but their celebration was short-lived. The mare, exhausted from the difficult birth, began showing signs of serious complications. Her breathing became shallow, and she couldn't seem to stand. She's going into shock, Daniel said, his voice tight with concern. We need to get fluids into her fast. They worked frantically to stabilize the mare while the newborn foal struggled to stand on shaky legs. Rachel found herself moving on pure instinct, her hands steady as she helped Daniel insert in 4-line and monitor the mare's heart rate. Rachel, I need you to hold pressure here while I get another 4 started, Daniel said without hesitation. Rachel pressed her hands where Daniel indicated, feeling the Mare's life literally in her hands. The horse's blood was warm against her palms, and she could feel the animal's heartbeat growing stronger under her touch. It took 3 hours, but they saved both the Mare and her foal. As they packed up their equipment in the early morning light, Mrs. Chun couldn't stop thanking them. I thought we were going to lose them both, she said, wiping tears from her eyes. You two are amazing together. On the drive home, Rachel was quiet, still processing the intensity of what they'd just experienced. She'd helped save 2 lives tonight, and the feeling was unlike anything she'd ever experienced. You were incredible back there, Daniel said, breaking the silence. I was just doing what you taught me. No, it was more than that. You have instincts that can't be taught. The way you connected with that Mare, the way you knew exactly what I needed before I asked for it. That's not something you learn from a textbook. Rachel felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the summer heat. Daniel ... I need to tell you something, he said, pulling the truck over to the side of the empty road. And I need to say it now, before I lose my nerve? They sat in the truck as the sun rose over the fields around them, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Daniel turned to face her, and Rachel could see something in his eyes that made her heart race. When you first came here, I thought I was done feeling anything real, he said. I thought I'd used up all my capacity for love when I lost Lisa and Amy. I was just going through the motions, trying to make it through each day. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. But watching you these past months, seeing you discover who you really are, seeing your strength and your kindness and your incredible gift with animals. Rachel, you've brought me back to life. Daniel, I know this is complicated. I know how you came to be here, and I know that's not something either of us can forget. But I also know that what I feel for you is real. It's not gratitude or loneliness or anything other than love. Pure, honest love. Rachel felt tears stinging her eyes. She'd been feeling the same thing for weeks now, but had been afraid to name it, afraid that acknowledging her feelings would somehow diminish the memory of the life Daniel had lost. I love you too, she whispered. Daniel reached for her hands, and she was surprised to find his were shaking slightly. Are you sure? I need you to be sure, because once we cross this line, everything changes. Everything already has changed. Rachel said, I'm not the same person who came here 6 months ago. That girl was lost, scared, angry at the world. This woman sitting here with you, she knows who she is and what she wants. And what do you want? I want to build a life with you. Not because I have to, not because of some arrangement my father made, but because I choose to. Because I love you, and I love the life we're creating together. Daniel cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away the tears that had started falling. Are you absolutely certain? Because I won't be able to let you go if we do this. I don't want you to let me go. When Daniel kissed her, it was nothing like the awkward, obligatory kiss Rachel had imagined when she first arrived at the ranch. It was tender and passionate and full of promise. It tasted like hope and new beginnings and the kind of love that grows slowly and roots deep. When they finally broke apart, both of them were crying. I never thought I'd feel this way again, Daniel said. I never thought I'd feel this way at all, Rachel replied. They drove home as the sun climbed higher in the sky, their hands intertwined on the seat between them. The ranch looked different somehow as they pulled into the driveway, like it was truly home for the first time. That afternoon, as they worked together in the barn, Rachel realized that her father's betrayal had led her to the greatest gift of her life. Not just Daniel's love, but her own strength, her own purpose, her own capacity to love deeply and completely. She was exactly where she was meant to be. Rachel was in the vegetable garden behind the house when she heard the cars. 3 black sedans, just like the ones that had brought her to the ranch 8 months ago. Her hands froze around the tomatoes she'd been picking, and her heart began to race. Daniel was in the barn, but he must have heard the engines too, because she saw him walking quickly toward the house, his face tense with concern. They'd been living in a bubble of happiness for the past 2 months, planning their future together and building their veterinary practice. Rachel had almost forgotten that her old life might come looking for her. The man who stepped out of the first car was one she recognized, the silver-haired man who'd sat in her kitchen on her 18th birthday. But this time he wasn't alone. Her father emerged from the second car looking older and more haggard than she remembered. His clothes hung loose on his frame, and his eyes darted nervously around the ranch. From the third car came two younger men in expensive suits, who looked like they spent more time in gyms than offices. Their presence made the peaceful ranch feel suddenly dangerous. "Rachel," her father called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "Come here, sweetheart. We need to talk." Rachel dropped the tomato and walked slowly toward the group, Daniel falling into step beside her. She was surprised by how calm she felt. The terrified girl who'd left this place 8 months ago was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew her own strength. "Hello, Dad," she said, stopping about 10 feet away from the cars. Close enough to talk, far enough to run if needed. "You look different," her father said, taking in her suntanned skin, her confident posture, her work clothes, that actually fit the life she was living. "I am different." The silver-haired man stepped forward with what he probably thought was a friendly smile. "Miss Peterson, I hope you've been well. We're here because your father's situation has changed." "How so?" Rachel asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Her father couldn't meet her eyes. "I got in trouble again, Rachel, deeper than before. These gentlemen have been very patient, but they need a different kind of arrangement now." "What kind of arrangement?" "There's a man in Chicago," the silver-haired man explained. "Very wealthy, very influential. He's looking for a young wife, someone with your particular qualities. The financial arrangement would be much more beneficial for everyone involved." Rachel felt Daniel tense beside her, but when she glanced at him, his face was completely calm. He positioned himself slightly in front of her, she realized, ready to protect her if necessary. "No," Rachel said simply. "Now, sweetheart," her father began, "you haven't heard the details yet. This man can give you everything. A mansion in Chicago, servants, jewelry, anything you want." I said no. "Rachel, be reasonable," her father pleaded. "This ranch life isn't what you were meant for. You're an educated girl. You deserve better than this." "Better than what?" "Better than having someone who loves me for who I am. Better than meaningful work that saves lives. Better than being treated as an equal partner instead of property." Rachel's voice grew stronger with each word. "You're right, Dad. I do deserve better. Better than being sold to pay for your mistakes." One of the younger men stepped forward. "Miss Peterson, I don't think you understand the gravity of your father's situation. This isn't a request." "Actually," a new voice said from behind Rachel, "I think you're the ones who don't understand the situation." Rachel turned to see Sheriff Martinez walking up the driveway, his hand resting casually on his weapon. Behind him were two deputies she recognized from town. Daniel must have called them when he saw the cars approaching. "Gentlemen," Sheriff Martinez said pleasantly, "I received a call about some out-of-state visitors making threats on my citizens. Thought I'd come check it out." The silver-haired man's smile became strained. "Officer, this is a family matter. A private arrangement." "Funny thing about that," the sheriff replied. "See, Miss Peterson here is one of our own now. She's enrolled in school, she's working in our community, she's building a life here. And in my experience, when men in expensive cars show up to threaten young women, it's rarely about family." "There's no threat," the man insisted. "We're simply discussing Miss Peterson's obligations." "What obligations?" Rachel asked, finding her voice again. "I fulfilled the original arrangement. I married Daniel as agreed. The debt was paid." "The debt was paid," her father said miserably. "But I borrowed more money, a lot more. And the terms are different this time." "The terms," Rachel said slowly, "don't include me. Not anymore." "Actually, they do," one of the younger men said, pulling out a folder. "Your father signed a new agreement. One that includes provisions for additional ... services. if the original debt couldn't be maintained. Sheriff Martinez stepped closer to the group. Let me see those papers. As the sheriff reviewed the documents, Rachel watched her father's face crumple with shame. She felt a mixture of anger and pity that surprised her. This man had controlled her entire childhood, had terrified her with his rages and his demands. Now he looked small and broken, a weak man who'd gambled away his family's future and couldn't stop. These papers aren't worth the ink they're printed on, Sheriff Martinez announced. Coercion, human trafficking, attempted kidnapping. You gentlemen have racked up quite a list of charges. Now wait just a minute, the silver-haired man began. No, you wait, Rachel interrupted, stepping forward. For the first time in her life, she was angrier than she was afraid. You want to know what my obligations are? My obligation is to the animals Daniel and I care for. My obligation is to the education I'm working toward. My obligation is to building a life based on love and respect, not fear and debt. She turned to her father. And my obligation to you ended the day you sold me to pay for your gambling addiction. I was 18 years old, Dad. I should have been starting college, not paying for your mistakes with my life. Rachel, please, her father whispered. They'll hurt me if you don't come. Then maybe it's time you face the consequences of your choices, Rachel said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. I'm not responsible for fixing your problems anymore. Daniel moved to stand beside her, taking her hand. She's not going anywhere, he said quietly. This is our home now. And if you try to force the issue, Sheriff Martinez added, you'll be dealing with the full weight of the law. Human trafficking is a federal crime, gentlemen. I've already called the FBI. The silver-haired man's composure finally cracked. This isn't over. Yes, it is, Rachel said firmly. It's been over since the moment I chose to stay here, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. You have no power over me anymore. As the three cars pulled away from the ranch, Rachel felt something she'd never experienced before, complete freedom. Not just from her father's debts or these dangerous men, but from the fear that had controlled her entire life. Daniel squeezed her hand. Are you okay? I'm perfect, Rachel said, and meant it. For the first time in my life, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be with exactly who I'm supposed to be with. Sheriff Martinez tipped his hat. If they come back, you call me immediately, but I have a feeling they won't. Bullies like that only pick on people they think can't fight back. As they watched the sheriff drive away, Rachel turned to Daniel. Thank you for calling him. Thank you for being brave enough to stand up to them. I had help, Rachel said, squeezing his hand. I wasn't alone this time. That night, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Rachel realized that her father's return had given her something unexpected, absolute certainty that she'd chosen the right life. She wasn't staying at the ranch because she had to anymore. She was staying because this was home. 1 year later, Rachel stood in front of the mirror in what used to be Amy's bedroom, now transformed into her own space filled with veterinary textbooks and wedding preparations. The white dress hanging on the closet door wasn't the elaborate gown she'd once dreamed of as a little girl. Instead, it was simple and elegant, perfect for a ceremony in the meadow behind the ranch house. Through the window, she could see Daniel setting up chairs with help from their neighbors. The whole community had come together to celebrate their wedding, the same people who'd rallied around them when her father had tried to take her away. Mrs. Chun was arranging wildflowers on a makeshift altar. The Patterson family was hanging lights between the oak trees. Even Sheriff Martinez was there, helping direct traffic as more cars arrived. You look beautiful, dear, said Mrs. Henderson, who'd become like a grandmother to Rachel over the past year. She was helping with the final touches, adjusting Rachel's veil and making sure everything was perfect. I can't believe this is really happening, Rachel said, smoothing down her dress. Sometimes I wake up thinking it's all been a dream. It's real, Mrs. Henderson assured her. And you've earned every bit of happiness coming your way. Rachel thought about how much had changed since that confrontation with her father 8 months ago. The veterinary assistant program had been challenging, but she graduated at the top of her class. She and Daniel now ran a thriving large animal practice. and it served ranches across 3 counties. More importantly, they built something beautiful together. A partnership based on mutual respect and genuine love. The door opened and Rachel's mother walked in. She looked nervous, clutching a small wrapped gift in her hands. Rachel had invited her parents to the wedding, though she'd made it clear that her father wasn't welcome unless he was sober and ready to apologize for the years of damage he'd caused. "Hi, Mom," Rachel said softly. "Oh, honey," her mother said, tears immediately filling her eyes. "You look so happy, so complete. I am happy." Her mother handed her the gift with shaking hands. "This was your grandmother's. I always planned to give it to you on your wedding day, but after everything that happened." Rachel unwrapped the small box to find a delicate silver bracelet with a tiny horseshoe charm. "It's beautiful, Mom." She always said it would bring good luck to the woman who wore it on her wedding day. Her mother helped fasten the bracelet around Rachel's wrist. "I'm so sorry, Rachel, for everything, for not protecting you better, for not standing up to your father sooner. Mom, we can't change what happened, but we can decide what happens next." "Your father is getting help," her mother said quietly. "Real help this time. He's been sober for 4 months now, and he's in therapy. He knows he can't be part of your life until he proves he's truly changed." Rachel nodded. She'd heard updates through her mother, and while she hoped her father would find peace, she'd learned that she couldn't fix his problems for him. Her job was to build her own life, not to rescue people who didn't want to be rescued. "Are you happy, Mom? Really happy?" Her mother smiled, the first genuine smile Rachel had seen from her in years. "I'm learning to be. I got a job at the library back home. Small steps, but they're my steps." A knock on the door interrupted them. "Ladies, it's time," came Daniel's voice from the hallway. Rachel's heart skipped. Even after all these months together, the sound of his voice still made her feel like a teenager with her first crush. She made her way downstairs and outside, where nearly 100 people had gathered in the meadow. These weren't strangers forced to attend an obligation. These were friends, neighbors, people who'd watched her and Daniel build their life together and wanted to celebrate their happiness. Daniel stood, waiting under the oak tree where they'd had their first real conversation about the future. He wore a simple black suit, and when he saw her walking toward him, his face lit up with the kind of joy that made everyone else smile too. The ceremony was performed by Pastor Williams from the local church, a kind man who'd counseled them through the unique challenges of their relationship. He spoke about love that grows from friendship, about partnerships built on mutual respect, and about the courage it takes to choose happiness after surviving hardship. "Daniel and Rachel," Pastor Williams said, "you've both learned that life doesn't always give us what we expect, but you've also learned that sometimes what we don't expect turns out to be exactly what we need." When it came time for vows, Daniel spoke first. "Rachel, when you came into my life, I thought I was saving you, but the truth is, you saved me. You reminded me that I was more than just my grief, more than just someone hiding from the world. You showed me that love doesn't replace what we've lost, but it can help us build something new and beautiful from the pieces that remain." Rachel's voice was steady as she spoke her own vows. "Daniel, you gave me the gift of choice. When I had no choices, you created space for me to find myself. When I was afraid, you showed me what real strength looks like. When I was lost, you helped me discover that sometimes getting lost is the only way to find where you truly belong." As they exchanged rings, Rachel looked out at the faces surrounding them, Mrs. Chun, who'd become like a mother to her, the Patterson family, who taught her about community, Sheriff Martinez, who'd shown her what protection without control looked like, dozens of neighbors who'd welcomed her not as Daniel's obligation, but as herself. "By the power vested in me," Pastor Williams announced, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Daniel, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was sweet and full of promise, witnessed by a community that had embraced their unconventional love story. As they broke apart, the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. The reception lasted until well after sunset. There was dancing under the stars, toasts that made everyone laugh and cry, and food prepared by neighbors who'd insisted on contributing to the celebration. Rachel danced with Daniel, with Mrs. Henderson, with Sheriff Martinez, and with her mother, who looked lighter than she had in years. As the evening wound down and the last guest departed, Rachel and Daniel sat on their porch swing, still in their wedding clothes, watching the final car disappear down the gravel road. "Mrs. Kane?" Daniel said, testing out her new name. "I like the sound of that," Rachel replied, curling up against his side. "Any regrets?" Rachel thought about the question seriously. Did she regret the college acceptance letters that had yellowed in a drawer? Did she regret the life she'd planned that had been torn away from her on her 18th birthday? "No," she said finally. "I don't regret anything. Not even the bad parts, because they led me here." "Even your father's gambling? Even being forced to come here?" "Even that. Because if none of that had happened, I never would have discovered who I really am. I never would have found my calling. I never would have met you." Rachel looked up at the stars, brighter here than anywhere she'd ever lived. "I used to think my life was ruined when I was 18. Now I realize it was just beginning." Daniel tightened his arms around her. "So what happens next, Mrs. Kane?" "We keep building. We expand the practice. We help more animals. We love each other every day and remember how lucky we are." Rachel smiled. "And maybe someday we fill this big house with kids who grow up knowing they're loved unconditionally." As they sat together in the peaceful night, Rachel reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. She'd started as a victim of circumstances beyond her control, but she'd become the author of her own story. The scared girl who'd been forced into a stranger's car had grown into a confident woman who'd chosen love, chosen purpose, and chosen to build something beautiful from the most unlikely beginning. Sometimes, Rachel thought as she drifted off to sleep in Daniel's arms, the most beautiful flowers really do bloom in the harshest soil.